Okay, we're live. We'll go ahead and call the Senate Revenue Committee meeting to order. Clayton, will you please call the roll?
Senator French.
Aye. Here.
Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator McEwen.
Excused.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Chairman Beitman.
Here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you a heads up, today I have a bill that I have to present across the hall. It looks like it's second or third up on their list, so when that happens, I will step out. Senator French will run the committee from there. If I get back, I'll be back. If not, it was good seeing you. But we have three bills up today. We're going to take them in order that you see on the schedule. If we get pressed for time, I have reserved the room for upon adjournment. So if we have to cut off public comment, if we can take public comment and then maybe cut it off 10 till 2, we have to be back upstairs at 2. We'll pick it back up after we get done with committee of the whole. So with that, first bill up for consideration is House Bill 3, engrossed property tax exemption for long-term homeowners. It was a joint revenue bill. Anybody here to present that bill? Seeing nobody, I guess I'll do it. This is a bill we took up during the interim. The idea being we needed targeted relief for our seniors who have been in their home for a long time. They may have purchased their home, in the 80s or earlier than that. And, their property taxes or their assessed valuations at the time were minimal. And now they're assessed, say in Teton County, for instance, they could have bought a home for $80,000 and now it could be worth over $1 million. Imagine what their property tax bill looks like. So that was the idea and the impetus for this bill. Page 1, we go into the exemptions. We've seen a lot of exemption bills this year, so we're familiar with those. Portion of a property tax used as a primary residence by long-term homeowners. For residential property used as a primary residence, if the owner or their spouse is 65 years of age or older, and the owner or their spouse has paid residential property tax in Wyoming for 25 years or more on any residential property, the amount of the exemption shall be 50% of the assessed value of the residential property. And it goes on to say there won't be any more than one exemption, same property per year. And then over on page 3, it's primary residence language, some definitions of who an owner is. Page 4, looks like the same language we passed out of committee. Committee, do you see anything strikingly different than what we did? I know this is an engrossed version. That is my explanation of this bill. I'll open it up for any public testimony. Director Henson, do you have anything from Department of Revenue? Welcome back to Revenue, Director.
Home sweet home. Good morning, Mr.
Good
Chairman. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and thank you for allowing me to speak to House Bill 3. As you stated, you articulated the language in the bill, just a couple of things that I thought I'd point out. So on page 4, this bill does state that it's up to a 4-family unit, but because it does require a primary resident, that means that whoever the property owner is has to occupy one of the units of that up to 4-family structure. The other piece on page 4 would be the residence and up to 35 acres, and I believe we'll hear some testimony regarding administration of that and the challenges that it holds. We anticipate, based on the information that we were able to glean, that this would probably be about 6,500 property owners statewide that would meet the age and then also be a primary owner. As stated in the bill, it only impacts tax years 25 and 26. We would promulgate rules. In fact, we've already drafted just kind of an idea of what an application would look like for a long-term homeowner to submit and provide it to the county assessor. It should be noted that this exemption, we'll just create it in the computer system, mass appraisal system. It will require the assessor going to that account and applying that exemption prior to when the abstract is submitted. So that's a key component because this particular piece of legislation is not backfilled. So what that means is when the assessor submits their abstract to the state board on June 1st, it only can include taxable value. And so that's why that processing piece is really important. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions.
Senator French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, do you have a sliding scale or whatever? I mean, when we started out, we were in the interim of 35 years, and then we settled on 30, and then it's been amended to 25. Do you have a scale, if it's 20 years, 15 years, 10, the impact that would be as it's, the residency requirement drops?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Senator French, we did not get down to that. All of our information comes from the census. And so it is really challenging. You know, from census information, we can tell how many people there are in each age bracket, but we really don't know how many are primary owners of the property that they occupy. And there is absolutely, excuse me, no way of knowing if they've paid property taxes for 25 years. So this is really our best guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Director, I see they put looking at comparing the gross version with the original, looks like they put in a sunset date for 2 years. 27. Okay. All right. I had received a question earlier today about the possibility of lumping all these together versus making people pick one, because we've got a suite of these property tax bills coming through the system, and they're all kind of flying together, and they all target different people. And so I've been hearing concerns, is it possible for the department to be able to tell people, okay, you can pick the $200,000 exemption bill if that were to pass, or these? Is this an a la carte option, or do we have to do all of them? If all these were to pass, do they all apply, or would there be a possibility for?
So, Mr. Chairman, my heart's palpitating.
Oh, okay.
If all of these were to pass. It has nothing to do with the cough.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it is important to note that for ease of administration, those are the concepts that we apply uniformly to all the properties. Anytime there's an application process, like this particular bill requires, even to try and net things out is a challenge. And so, for example, we've thought about the veterans exemption. That's an exemption that right now is $3,000 assessed dollars. What's nice about that particular exemption that is if you don't use it on your property, your home, your primary residence, then you can use it on your motor vehicle license plates. So by assuming they use a homestead exemption, or in this case, 50% of their residential property value is exempt, they could utilize this exemption and then use their veterans benefit on their motor vehicle plates. But if we go down the path of, for example, we're going to talk about in House Bill 45, some sort of where we look at individual structures and apply a maximum increase that they can't, and then exempting anything above that. Our thought process is that anything that's a cap, we have to calculate that first, and then any sort of a homestead exemption, that would be in addition to that. But because so many of these have the repealers or a different effective date, this particular bill doesn't go into play until 2025 property taxes. So anything we're doing in 2024 is not applicable. And many of the things that we're going to do in 2024 may only then apply in 2025. And I feel like I'm rambling, but as you can tell, we have really given a lot of thought to this. And if we're confused a little bit, put yourself in the shoes of the taxpayer. And that's probably enough for me to say.
All right, appreciate it. Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Bidman. Those were, he asked a lot of the same questions. We've had discussions, we've got a lot of tax bills, a lot of them might overlap. We're afraid to kick any of them out at this point because we don't know what's going to pass and what's going to fail. So we'll sort through all of that just so, maybe people, like if we pass 45 or 54 or whatever, they may not be able to take, the opportunity to use both of them to get their property taxes lower, trying to find a fair way to do it. So yeah, same sort of questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, we can do 45 and a homestead exemption. Not a concern. We can do 45 and we can do this piece of legislation that you're discussing today. So there are opportunities there. It's just those that we can load using technology and automatically load, those are administratively less burden to both the taxpayer and to county assessors across the state. Anything where there's an application that has to be hand keyed into that account that meets those qualifications. This particular bill is not a significant number, we don't believe, about 6,500, but if it were very broad and didn't have any age or years of paying taxes or hand keying a significant number is a challenge for county assessors.
Okay, so I guess going back to my original question and try to restate it, I think we're going to see some amendments on the floor to try to restrict people from picking one or over another. So if all three of these were to, if 45, Senate File 54, and this, and the next bill were to all go through and be signed into law, that's a lot there. Would it be doable for you to implement some sort of a, pick one, or how would you triage these? You kind of mentioned you could do this and that and this and that. Could you explain how that triage would go? Which would be first, the 200,000 exemption or the cap or the homeowner or the elderly exemption or the veterans exemption? How does that work for you in your department?
Mr. Chairman, so first and foremost, you don't want it to be create a situation where the taxpayer is the one making that decision and determining what is most beneficial for them. Because that means that you've got to communicate with the over 240,000 taxpayers out there, and then that's just not a possibility. So if in fact House Bill 45 were to pass, the cap, that is only going to be an exemption if your residential structure or your residential land, as it's written today, goes up more than 5% from the prior tax year. We're going to have numerous properties, probably the majority of properties, that aren't going to receive a benefit from that exemption. So we'll run that calculation. Each county would do that, apply those exemptions. Then, should the legislature put in place a homestead exemption, whatever the amount of assessed value is, that could be applied automatically on top of that. If this bill were to pass, you could put some language that says, if you take this exemption, you wouldn't qualify for a homestead exemption, because that's really the only one that I think that would double up on you. The veterans exemption, I think we can articulate that to the property owners that it's to your benefit to go ahead and use these other exemptions, because you only get an exemption of 3,000 assessed dollars, and even if 89 passes, that takes it to 6,000, that still is less than what these that are being considered. And they can use that on their motor vehicle registrations. So I think I've covered all of the concepts. If I've missed anything, please let me know.
So the only, as I'm hearing it, Director Henson, the only hiccup could be the play between the homestead exemption and this bill.
And this bill. And if you deem it appropriate, I mean, they still are responsible, Mr. Chairman, for 50% of their taxes. If you wish that they also get a homestead exemption on top of that, we can do that.
Okay, so the homestead exemption would knock it down 200,000, and then they would get 50% off of that, whatever that number is, if they took both.
Right. And
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, the only thing that really throws a little bit of a monkey wrench in this is if, when it gets through, the homestead exemption is some sort of a percentage. If it's a percentage, then it starts to look a little wonky on how we, this is 50% of the overall tax bill, 25%. Then we really do need a logical order of which one do you apply first? Because it may affect that math.
yeah, the dollar amount's a lot cleaner. Okay. Any more questions for Director Henson? Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely, and
Appreciate
just,
you.
the only thing is, time is of the essence, because county assessors need to get their assessment schedules out no later than the fourth Monday in April.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else, public comment? Come on up, everybody. Take you in order.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie. Excuse me. You have a term in this bill, domicile, that applies to military members, and I want to talk a little bit to that. Sometimes you hear the term home of record brought up. That does not apply. That is a document in a military record that only declares where the government is obligated to move you to in your household goods when you leave active duty. There's another piece of paper on which you declare a domicile. Wyoming doesn't usually think about this because it's really not a useful term except for those states that have an income tax, because that's who can tax you as a military member. However, I think there's a utility in this feature here. Most military members would probably, particularly career members, would probably be unable to claim this because of their active duty in other places. I was 30 years, moved 19 times, many times, retired from active duty in 02, built my house on property I already owned in Wyoming in 05 and 06. And even today, I wouldn't be eligible for this because I haven't been here 25 years in this house. I would offer you the thought that you might look at counting their active duty time, so long as Wyoming was their domicile, as part of that 25 years. And if they came back to the state and say within a year of leaving active duty, occupied a principal residence or something like that. Subject to your questions, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Thank you for pointing that out. That is another feature or bug, in whichever you consider it, as from the engrossed version versus the original. That was not in the original version of the bill, so I appreciate you catching that. Do you support or oppose the bill?
I support the bill.
Okay.
I mean, there's people out there hurting that need something like this, but I'm going to talk on your other bills too.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Winnie? None, thank you. Who's next? Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Donna Castle, and I'm with AARP, and I want to advocate for those of us who are on that sociological path they call the oldest of the old. And we support this bill, but we would like to have the committee consider the fact that some of us have been here almost 50 years and over 50 years. We're in our 80s. We don't have as much income as we did before. And even forgiving half is not necessarily as good as none. And I feel that people who have been here that long, myself, I've been here 48 years, that we have put anywhere between 3.5 to 4 generations through schools. We've paid the taxes on roads and things like that for many generations, well, 3 for sure. And I think it would be nice if the committee would consider canceling the real estate tax for those people who are the least able to pay it now. It's kind of like a payback for supporting the community for all those years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Castle. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor, thank you for giving me a couple minutes to speak. The assessors have reviewed the engrossed bill. As we know, the bills change form from when they first come in, and we have not had the opportunity for the association to take a vote. But our legislative committee has had some conversation about it, and some comments that we would make starting on page 2, and this goes to what Director Henson was talking about time-wise. So down on line 21, this talks about the 4th Monday in May each year for these applications to be submitted. And as she stated, we have until June 1st to get all that entered and values balanced and everything correct to go to the abstract. So we would respectfully ask that that be changed to an earlier date. Initially, I had said February 1st, but the assessors suggested March 1st. That's already a date for our personal property exemptions to be in. So it's a date that's in statute that some people are already familiar with. So that might be a better date than February 1st, but just a date that would be prior to that 4th Monday in May would be beneficial to us. The second comment that I have is on page 3. Starting on at line 4, where it talks about a surviving spouse of a person qualified under this paragraph and who would not otherwise qualify shall continue to qualify for the exemption of this paragraph. We referred back to some veterans exemption language. That has very similar language, except when the widow or widower remarries, then they're no longer eligible. And I didn't know if the committee had thought about that. The way we read this language is the spouse would be eligible for this exemption until forever, even if they remarried. So I don't know if there could be some language where until they remarry, they're qualified until they remarried or qualify on their own. Again, we'll administer whatever wants to be, but that was just some language. The statute for that veterans is 3913-105, paragraph H, if somebody wants to reference that back. So that was just a thought. Like I said, we're not particular one way or the other, just a comment. And then on page 4, down on line 23, where it says associated residential land up to 35 acres. We talked about this initially, and there was good reason to maybe put the 35 acres in there. But as we visited with the department and with our CAMA providers, the ability to administer this would be very difficult. They'd have to calculate, on a parcel that's larger than 35 acres, they would have to calculate a per acre rate and then establish an exemption for that. So we're just going to recommend that maybe after the word land, strike the rest of it up to 35 acres and just leave it associated land. That seems to be the theme, and certainly more manageable administration-wise. And again, this is a smaller number of applicants. It's not like we're talking 200 and some thousand. So, and then again, the last thing was the layering, the priority of the exemptions. We have the same exact concern that you visited with, Director, and we have no preference. We just have to know how to put them in which order to get the right calculation to work. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Any questions? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Chairman Bidman. Ms. Huxtable. just want to make sure I've got you right here on page 4, line 23. Essentially, you guys are looking at taking out up to 35 acres. That's it, and just leave it as it reads right now. With that deleted. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's correct. Basically, just leaving it as associated residential land.
All right. Ms. Huxtable, do you have anything to say, comment on the word domicile on page 4, line 13? That looked like it was added in from the house. Is that going to be a problem?
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't have any comments. I seriously guess I'd have to do a little research on that. I'm presuming that the application form is going to have some of that language on there to define what that means, and then we would just be verifying that as it comes to our office. Currently, the veterans exemption is a 3-year residency requirement, so they sign an affidavit as to when they became a resident of Wyoming. So that's the most exposure I've had to veterans language. I think we could probably do it. We're just probably gonna need a little guidance through the department rules and through the form.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions? Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. All right, keep on coming. Mr. Moline, welcome back to Revenue, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline with Wyoming Farm Bureau, sitting in support of this bill. This hits my membership very well, with the average age of agricultural operators going up. This will be a definite benefit to my members, and I do appreciate the including in property that's in partnerships, trusts, et cetera. There's a lot of reasons people put their property into that. So I'm glad it's explicit that that residential property that are under those organizations would qualify. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would take any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Mr. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, any comment on the years? It's currently 25 years. Any comment? Should it be higher? Should it be lower?
Ms. Moline.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator French, I mean, that's just a policy decision you folks have to make. I'm fine with that as it is. With, most farm and ranch operators have been here a long time. There's a lot of multi-generational farms and ranches. Of course, making that a shorter duration will help more people, and making it a younger age will help more people. So that would be a benefit to the citizens of the state. But as far as those two numbers where they sit right now, I have no problem with them, sir.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you, Ms. Moline. Good afternoon, sir. Please introduce yourself to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, Gary Brown, Cheyenne resident and Central Committeeman with Laramie County Republican Party. I would like to address the number of years that this covers. There's a lot of people here that have come here within the last 10, 12, 15 years. And obviously, they didn't have kids in school, but they've been paying property taxes and paying into the schools and like that. So these people are on fixed incomes, and just because they haven't been here 25 years does not mean their dollars buy more. They're still hurting. So these people need help too, and I would encourage you to look at the idea of lowering that to 10 or 12 years. Also here in Laramie County, most people don't know this, but they've taken a windfall on property taxes over the last 12 years. In 2023, they banked $118,588 more than they took in property taxes. In 2021, they banked in excess of $3.8 million more than they took in property taxes. Excuse me. And in 2012, they banked $3.6 million more than they took in property taxes. So you can see that, and I know we're talking about a single county here, but that's a windfall. So I would encourage you to lower that rate for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Winnie?
Point of information.
Come on up, Mr. Winnie.
I heard the term resident come up with regard to the veterans exemption. And sometimes that term domicile and resident get rolled together, but they're really different terms. The domicile emanates from the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act. That's a mechanism by which the federal government withholds income taxes from a active duty military member for their state that they claim as their domicile. Wyoming doesn't care much about that because we don't have an income tax. With regard to the veterans exemption, you have to have lived in your house for 3 years. I built my house in 2005. I've been a domiciliary of Wyoming since 1978, but I was hither and yon for all those years. I couldn't take the exemption until 2009 because of that 3-year reside in the house kind of thing. So just some items, subject to your questions. Thank you.
Appreciate the clarification, Mr. Winnie. Thank you. Okay. Any more public comment in the room? Not seeing any. Clayton, is anybody on Zoom?
Mr. Chairman, there are 2 people on Zoom, but none of them have raised their hand yet.
Okay. Last chance for those of you on Zoom, if you want to testify on House Bill 3, property tax exemption for long-term homeowners. Going once, going twice. Okay. That public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by French. Second by Ide. Discussion on the bill. Any discussion? Senator Ide.
Thanks, Chairman Bidman. I think, this is another property tax bill. Obviously, it's, I'm not in favor of all kinds of different bills and getting special interests that we're given benefits to essentially, or relief to. But in the situation that we're in, I think we need to move this bill and work it on the floor. The comments from Dixie Huxtable from Converse County, I think, we need to back up that date maybe to March 4th. That's going to cause problems if we don't. And I like that other amendment she brought there. So, the moving target on the age and the time that you need to live in Wyoming, I think the bigger body can maybe discuss that, but I like the bill the way it is, just to move it up with a few of those minor amendments. Thank you, Chairman Biden.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Any discussion? Any amendments? Let's go for it.
Okay, I'll make that.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'll make the first one, page 2, line 21. Strike 4th Monday in May and add March 1st.
Second.
Second.
So it's been seconded by Ide. So Clayton, did you catch that? Line 21 on page 2, strike 4th Monday in May and replace it with March 1st. I guess we'd have to go on to line 20, strike the. So it reads, not later than March 1st each year. Thank you. Friendly amendment. Discussion? Hearing none. Question being called. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That amendment has been adopted. Any other amendments, committee?
I don't have language for that.
Yeah, on page 3, we heard some testimony as to whether or not we should tie that to the, that first paragraph at the top of the page to the veterans exemption language. And without having that language in front of us, maybe that could be a good committee of the whole amendment. I've got it in my notes, what we need to do, and maybe we can get with Ms. Huxtable and make that amendment on the floor, so we get it right. Anything else on page 3? Flipping over to page 4. Do I have a motion on page 4? Senator Ide?
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, yeah, I propose to amend page 4, line 23, after the word land, strike up to 35 acres. And so it will read associated land where the dwelling is located, without that language.
Have a second?
Second.
Second by French. Any discussion? Question being called. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That amendment has been adopted. Anything on page 4 or 5? You guys want to do anything with this sunset date or leave it in there? Effective date is January 1st, 2025. Any more amendments? Hearing none, question being called. Clayton, will you please call the roll?
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator McEwen.
McEwen left a proxy of aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Chairman Beitman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 5 ayes and 0 noes.
Okay. Okay. So, who's all here to testify on House Bill 4? I'm almost wondering if we could bump, these guys have been waiting very patiently, these legislators, to do 45. Would it be okay with the audience if we could do 45 first? And then we'll get to 4 after that. Okay. So without objection, we'll move up. House Bill 45 will be the next bill up for our consideration. Property tax exemption residential structures and land. Sponsored by Representative Crago, co-sponsored by the good Senator Nethercott. Thank you for being in revenue. Please introduce yourself and present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Barry Crago, House District 40. Happy to be in front of you today to present House Bill 45 and the engrossed version. Hopefully you have that in front of you, and I'll walk you through it. If you have, I'll try not to get too deep in the weeds unless you would like that, Mr. Chairman. You've heard all of the, you've heard the bill, you've seen the bill, but mostly I'll focus on the changes we've made from Senate File 63 that we made in the House. So start with House Bill 45 is the cap bill. It's an exemption structured as a cap, or a cap structured as an exemption, however you want to look at it. Under the bill, the maximum increase your property can go up every year is 5%. It's really an attempt to solve the problem we've been dealing with all over the state. Some of our counties have had a bigger hit than others, but we're just trying to stop the double-digit increases in a lot of these counties, and I think we're going to see more of them in the future, obviously, as more people discover how great Wyoming is and want to move here. And so it's really our attempt is just put some reform in our current statutory scheme to help with that problem. So starting on page 2, which is really where the meat of the bill starts, talks about how the exemption works, and that's down on page, or down on lines 15 through 20. And we had some questions, and I believe this language was added into Senate File 63 as well, but just to clarify that it can only go up 5% every year based on the previous year's assessed value. And so that's that language, less any exemption authorized under this paragraph in the prior year. And I believe we have one little minor correction we're going to have to make in that particular part of the bill. And when the director comes up, I think she can explain it better than I can. But there's one little correction we need to make there. Turning to the next page, at the top of the page there, we're describing those circumstances when the property is not going to qualify for the exemption. And that's if there's structural changes to the property, i.e. you add on to the home, you change the size of the home. Really, that's what it's about. Minor changes on the inside of the home are not going to affect the exemption. And then it goes down to talk about if the property changed ownership in the prior year. And we had some questions on the house side, what's that mean? And so we defined what does not qualify as a change in ownership, which is a transfer to your spouse, a transfer pursuant to a court order, a transfer to a trust that you might set up for yourself, for example, part of estate planning, a transfer to a corporation, partnership, or LLC of which you're the owner, also done oftentimes for estate planning purposes or liability protection purposes. And then we put a catch-all phrase in there on line 10 on page 4. Any other transfer of property that the department determines by rule should not be an acquisition of property due to the relationship of the parties. And that's really, if there's something we haven't thought of, as the legislature, the department has additional authority to say, hey, that's not a transfer that disqualifies you from the exemption. And below that, they will adopt rules, set up rules and procedures to put all this into place. Line 18 is where we define what a single-family residential structure is. And then one of the things we added on the house, actually on the floor, and it was a good amendment, and I need to back up a little bit. The original bill would have gone into effect, or will go into effect, the original portion of it, only in 2024, and it only would have applied to the residence itself. And the reason it only applied to the residence itself is because there's not enough time between session and when all these exemptions have to be processed to include anything else than that. Other than that, the current system between the department and our assessors can do it through the current system. It also does not require that it be owner occupied, also because we would not be able to process those applications. So it applies to all single-family residential structures. What we did on the house side was add in land and any associated structures, which would be garages, shops, other outbuildings. But both of those would only become effective in 2025. And so there's some language at the bottom of page 4, line 22 and 23, and then going over onto the top of page 5, discussing that. And there's one little, I'm gonna suggest when we get to the end, one clarifying amendment that I didn't catch and I should have, but this was a good amendment brought by one of my colleagues on the floor, and it does make the bill stronger. And on line 1, the amendment that I'm gonna suggest at the end is it talks about associated approved land and other structures. And really what we're doing, we're doubling up there and we're gonna create some confusion, because within the bill, there's actually 2 exemptions. There's one for the buildings, and then there's another one for the land. And although they're identical in language, we had separated those out on the house side because one does not apply until 2025, and one applies immediately for the homes. And so I think if you look at the top there on line 1, it says associated improved land. Well, really, there's a whole nother section to this bill where that is taken care of. And so I don't think we need that language, but we do need the language regarding other structures associated with the residential structure. So when we get to the end, we can walk through that a little more in detail. Moving on down on page 5, the rest of that page deals with the exemption that would apply for land. And it has all of the same terms and conditions that apply to the home, i.e. when does a transfer take you out of the exemption, et cetera. And it goes all through transfer, of course, to a spouse, or transfer to your trust or your LLC or your partnership, and again, it has the catch-all language as well. And then the definition of what an improved land associated with a single-family residential structure means is at the top of page 7. Any questions so far, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Craigo. Backing up to what you just said on the top of page 5, line 1, are you saying you want that to read like at the end of page 4, single-family residential structure shall include other structures, and delete the associated improved land at the start of line 1?
That's exactly right, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, because I think we're doubling up and it's gonna might cause some confusion and I think the director can probably explain this better, or one of the assessors when they come up. But the reason being, we're actually doing the land through the rest of the bill, starting below that. And I think just by accident, and I think we were just trying to make sure we're being inclusive when we didn't actually need to be. And so I think we could just take out the words at the top, associated improved land and then it would say the other structures associated with the residential structure. And then I think that would catch what we're trying to do with that amendment. Just, I would say it's a cleanup, really. We're not taking anything out or adding anything in other than clarifying which part of the exemption land would actually fall under, because it's the second part. Because that's where all the definitions are and all the clarifying language about how the exemption for the land would work. Hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Chairman. So back on the bill, moving down through page 7, that's just language noting that the exemption will show up on your assessment notice that comes out in April. And that was, we wanted to make it clear to the taxpayers how this exemption works and that it will show up and it will be automatic on your tax assessment. Moving down, we also did the same thing for your tax bill. So when the treasurer sends your tax bill out, the exemption is going to show up on that. And that serves two purposes. One, to notify the public and the taxpayer what the exemption is worth, what their home would have been taxed at, and now what it's going to be taxed at. The other thing it does is allows the treasurers, if someone calls in and asks, for example, a realtor, hey, what are the taxes on this property? They can say, well, for a new homeowner, it's going to be this, but for the current owner, it's this because of the exemption, because once the property sells, the exemption does not roll on to the next person. And so then the rest of the language on page 9 talks about the effective dates and which portions are effective immediately or actually back to January 1st, 2024, and which portions will not be effective until 2025, which is the land portion and the portions related to other structures. And that is pretty much it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any members of the board have any questions of Representative Crego at this time? Mr. Pappas.
Yeah, thank you. My question is, I noticed that this bill doesn't have a sunset date. And we've been, on all the past, most of them we're passing through here, we've been hesitant not to put a sunset date in because, you know, we don't know what's gonna happen down the line, and we wanna be able to pull the plug if need be. Would there be an issue adding a sunset date?
Mr. Chairman. Senator Pappas. So we had that discussion on the floor, and on all the tax bills that came through the House, we had the discussion about putting a sunset date in, and most of them we did. For whatever reason, the body did not in this one. I'm not opposed to that. You know, if it's a good idea, we will have no problems taking the sunset off in a couple years. So that, you know, that's up to the committee, and it's in your hands now down on the other end of the hall. So whatever the body thinks is best is fine with me. But as far as the structure of the bill and how it works, I don't think that will cause a problem.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Chairman French. Senator Nethercott, Representative Crego, thanks for being here. I think this is our last cap bill even floating around. I wanted to make sure of that too, and I think it's good that we still have one. there again, none of them are perfect, but we need to get the full body to vet these things, other than, we're down to 3 right here right now in this committee. But the one question I have in this bill is the 5%. And personally, I would prefer to see that maybe indexed to the lesser of like a CPI or 5%. That's sort of an amendment that I'd like to see in this, just because if maybe we have a recession or inflation is less, then we could index it closer to what's going on in the market. So that's all I had, Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Yes, also, I noticed that, if looking at the fiscal impact, it says it's indeterminable. Was there any discussion on your side about that number and what we could expect?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, there was. And so if you look further down into the fiscal note, you will see that had this been in effect last year, it would have had an effect of about $49.5 million. The reason it says indeterminable is we don't know how much property values are going to go up. We know what property values are. And so I believe that's why the department determined that it was indeterminable at this point. Ask us in a month and they could tell you exactly what the effect will be. It's just because we're going backwards in time and at the same time, we can't predict the future. And so I think that's why they were hesitant to give us an exact number, because they don't know what it is. But they did tell us what it would have done had it gone into effect last year, which is, we'll say, close to $50 million.
Any more questions of Representative? Senator Nethercott, do you have anything to add?
I do not, good senators. I know we've been talking about these issues for a while, so happy to answer any questions either now or on the floor.
Any questions of Senator Nethercott? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any problems from you guys as far as that inflation on CPI index on that 5%? Thank you.
Representative.
Thank you, Senator. So here, Mr. Chairman, Senator, I apologize. One of the reasons I picked a number versus tying it to the CPI is just certainty. Budgeting purposes, and so I'm not a big fan of that particular route. I'm not opposed to it either. I just picked this because it's simplistic. It's easy for our department and our assessors to handle. If you wanted to pick a lower number, I think that'd be a better discussion if I was going to direct you anywhere, Senator. And the reason being is people will be able to look at their tax bill this year, and if they know it's 5, 4, 6, 10, whatever the number is, they would know, okay, they can do the math easy, right? They can take their tax dollars, whatever their bill was, punch it into their phone and say, this is what it's going to be next year. And it just allows them to budget. The other way, I'm not sure that's as easy to predict when it's not set in statute at some certain, if that makes sense.
Well, Representative, are you dead set on that 5%?
Mr. Chairman, I am not dead set on anything. I want to just get something passed that helps the people, right? And I just want to add one other thing. Outside of this bill, and in particular, I think we still have to do something else. This only is part of the problem in my mind. This is more of a reform bill. It's not a relief bill. This doesn't mean more dollars are going back to the folks. I think I keep telling everybody that it's a 2-leveled approach, and I think we have to keep that in mind. And so that's also one of the other reasons I picked the 5. Because if we as a body, as the legislature decides, we're gonna do some major relief and actually cut taxes on what I say on the bottom side of the tax bill versus the top side, then that makes the 5 not as big of a deal. If we're not going to do that, then I think that changes what we do with that 5%, right? And so to all of your points that you've said multiple times just since I've been sitting here today, and what we've all talked about, what we do as a package is going to matter. And so that becomes more complicated. But most of the good news is a lot of these bills are on your end now, and I think you can craft them as you need to and put together the bills in a package that works for everybody. And at that point, Senator, to your point, you can start messing with that number, so to speak, and decide what is best. And, you know, if we're doing a much larger homestead exemption, then maybe the 5% is okay. If we're not doing a big homestead exemption, then I would agree with you that that number can be moved downward. So I think that's what we have to think about.
Thank you very much. Anything more? Stick around. Any agencies? Director Henson?
Good afternoon. Acting Mr. Chairman, Brenda Henson,
Scared.
Director of the Department of Revenue. Really appreciate the opportunity to discuss House Bill 45. A great deal of time and effort have gone into this concept. Couple things I thought I'd touch on because we were talking about the fiscal note. So keeping in mind that this particular concept does not have a backfill. Okay, so whatever shortfalls there are, all of the taxing entities will see that reduction in their tax dollars that they collect. And so that's important to recognize as we move forward with this bill. The other piece of this is the fiscal note. When we compile fiscal notes at the Department of Revenue on all of the different concepts that we've got, we're required to use the Craig report for a basis of those fiscal notes. So keeping in mind that the January Craig said for the all other category of property, which is everything excluding minerals, the Craig is only estimating from 23 to 24 a 5% increase. So if that's our starting point, and this is a maximum of 5% on any given structure, as you can see, that would indicate that this bill is a wash, that there would not be a fiscal impact. Now, that does not mean there isn't an impact to that individual property owner that may see their structure value, that the appraised value, the fair market value was in excess of the 5%, and that they received an exemption. It's just as you're looking at the budgeting process and why that really was indeterminable. I hope that helps with the fiscal note. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to somewhat just walk through the bill and turn your attention to page 2. And one of the discussions, Senator Ide, Mr. Chairman, just to talk about indexing of some sort. So another benefit of using a percent is just timing. So as we've stated, county assessors right now are finalizing their values. They're going to be sending out assessment schedules no later than the 4th Monday in April. Sometimes those index numbers are not readily available until April, May. We've got to have a number that county assessors can use so that it can be reflected on the assessment schedule when they're mailing no later than the 4th Monday in April, and some of them mail in March. So that's why indexing is it's a moving target. And at what point would they find out what that percent is that is applicable to this? So that's why the 5% really ends up being a more manageable number, in addition to the comments that Representative Crago mentioned. Also on page 2, in the other chamber, there was some confusion about the math behind this 5%. So we used the example of starting with a $100,000 value on a structure. And let's say the fair market value comes in at 110. This exemption applies a 5%, which would bump that back down to the 105,000. But then there was some confusion of where's the starting point for the following year. And so we added the language, less any exemption authorized under this paragraph in the prior year plus 5%, to ensure everybody understood that we're going to start at that 105,000. But I would ask the committee to strike the comma after assessed value on line 19 And also on page 5, when we get into the land statutes, it would be on line 13 after assessed value, strike that comma, because that is one, it should flow, the way that should read is shall be any assessed value of the single-family residential structure that is in excess of the prior year assessed value, less any exemption authorized under this paragraph. That's one thought.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator.
Ms.
I-
Henson, could you back up that last part? I got the first one on page 2, but where did you go from page 2? Just so I can track in what you're saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, it would be page 5, line 13. After you've got year assessed value, comma, strike that comma. Hopefully everybody understands the math now, and I'm going to follow up on the math. There was good reason to have the improvements in one exemption, and then we add the land in another exemption, and it has to do with the math. So if I have a residential structure that's at that 100,000, and then it goes to the 110, we make that 105. But if we didn't split it out and have two different exemptions, were we to administer that as we add the structure and the land, and then we determine whether the total of the two exceed the 105. The way this bill is written at this point, we make the calculation on the improvement, and we exempt anything over 105%, and then we make the calculation on the land, and we exempt anything over the 105% from the prior year. They're two separate exemptions, but it just ensures that statewide, we're doing the math the same statewide in that instance. The other, I would like to then draw your attention to page 4 and that language. So we've talked about these two separate exemptions, but yet we kind of have this straggler in the first exemption that talks about
Which lines are you on?
the
Sorry.
line 22 and 23. So that's the ending of the exemption for the residential structure. And then we have this sentence that talks about beginning in tax year 2025, single-family residential structure shall include the associated improved land and other structures. But the associated land is a totally different exemption. And so to Representative Crago's point, there's a couple of ways that we could handle that. This is a much cleaner bill, I'll just honestly tell you, if we're not worrying about outbuildings. Outbuildings are a challenge, and the reason why we're asking that the outbuildings perhaps be in the later year is because we're trying to determine which outbuildings are associated with the residents and which outbuildings are associated with the agricultural operation, which outbuildings are associated with the mechanic shop that's also on the property. So outbuildings have been a challenge throughout the discussions. If it were the will of this committee to limit it to the residential structure, at that point, you could delete the language on line 22 right after the period where it says beginning in tax year 2025, delete all the way through to the end of line 3, page 5. And then I would suggest for the next exemption, we add beginning in tax year 2025, a portion of the improved land associated with a single-family residential structure. And then you let that exemption flow. If it's the will of the committee to look at the residential structures, I think that's another discussion that we need to have. The bill itself does provide the Department of Revenue with the ability to promulgate rules, and obviously we'll do that. This bill, the residential structure piece, starts in 2024, so we anticipate that we'll be promulgating emergency rules. With all of the clarifications with the ownership, we don't think that there's a vast need for a lot of rulemaking. We have reached out to county assessors to ask them, are there terms, are there, areas that are not clear? And right now, it's really geared towards those outbuildings and what are associated with that residential structure and what are not. But other than that, this is a fairly easily administered exemption, and the computer-assisted mass appraisal system can apply this for 2024. And even with the requirement that the notice of value has to reflect the amount of that exemption, we can accommodate that as long as the legislature acts fairly soon. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions.
Well, we will have to act pretty soon. We're running out of time. Any questions of Director Henson?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Nethercutt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With Director Hanson here, she mentioned to you on page 5, really on line 5, adding the language beginning in tax year 2025. This is in relationship to the outbuilding application of this 2 exemption bill. And Representative Craigo just was sharing with me that he believes that that's unnecessary to add that language there as a result of the effective dates of the bill. So because the effective dates have 2 different effective times, the first applying to the residential structures in 2024 only, and then residential and the outbuildings in 25, that we wouldn't have to put that into statute as a result of that effective date. So the director might want to think about that as well and see if she concurs.
Senator Hyde.
Chairman French, thank you, and thanks for those comments. I was kind of going along those lines too, right there. I don't think it's necessary. I don't really want to take that out of there, number one. So if we can get away with it and satisfy you guys, I'd just soon leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions of Director Henson? Okay, stick around. Any other agency comments? Going once, going twice? Okay, yeah, just stick around there, close. Public comment?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. You all are dealing with a plethora of bills. I got it. All of these bills are trying to deal with the various tentacles of inflation. The problem you have and are trying to solve is our Constitution did not contemplate inflation as government policy. It also didn't contemplate the run-up in house or property values as a result of people fleeing other states. And you've got people out there on fixed incomes that are hurting. And so you want to do something, I think you're obligated to. I'd like to note that the net effect of the Bureau of Labor Statistics cost of living adjustment over the 21 years since I retired from active duty has been to double my Navy pension. And no kidding, doubled in that time. Well, you got people on fixed incomes that haven't seen that. I also want to mention to you 3 things. You have 2 different CPIs. You have a CPI-U, which is kind of a CPI for everybody, and there's a CPI-W, which is for urban workers, and that is the one the federal government uses to come up with the cost of living adjustment for my Navy pension, Social Security, and other things. Finally, those people that are on Social Security and reliant on that, they don't end up getting a full multiplier from the CPI calculation because there's a Medicare increase that reduces that a little bit. And I'd like you to stop and think for a minute as you contemplate all these bills that pushing an elderly family out of their home because of taxes ends up costing you more because they're probably going to go into an elder care facility and that'll cost the state more to maintain them there than if they could have stayed in their own home. So I support the bill. I think you're obligated to do something. I wish you luck on trying to meld all of these different bills together. I followed most of them. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Rennie? Sir, we're trying our hardest. We've got a number of bills, as you can tell by the discussion and vigorous discussions. Do we do this? Do we backfill? Do we not? Do we do this? Do we say A? Do we say B? You know, so we really are trying. And we hear from the folks out there and the seniors that are on fixed incomes. They're in these counties like mine, up there in the northwest corner where property taxes are going up 25% per year. Yeah, they're in a difficult situation, and we're doing our best to try to come up with some real relief.
Mr. Chairman, I got it. I've been trying to follow all of these bills too, so God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moline?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, supporting this bill. I think Representative Craigo said it very well. This gives some certainty on what's going to happen to your property taxes. So, and all the other reasons I gave on the last bill, reasons for supporting this bill, would prefer to not have a sunset on this bill. The other bills actually cut taxes. This bill doesn't cut taxes. It reduces the increase. It caps the potential increase. And to me, that's a pretty significant difference. So would prefer to add to the certainty of taxes, to not have a sunset. This body can always come back and delete the law, which is that's a sunset of its own, but would prefer this just to be, at this point, a perpetual law rather than one that has a sunset. And with the issue of indexing, not a fan of that. There's lots of different indices that you can use. Which one would you choose? Consumer Price Index that measures all prices? Well, and there's been years when it's been severely dominated by an increase in fuel. Would you look at the index of wages? Does wages directly correlate to property valuation change? So just leaving at 5%, again, to ditto Representative Craigo, that's the certainty that I like about this bill. You can always come back and change this. I know it's difficult to change something that's already in existing statutes, but if that 5% isn't right, if it's not working, you can come back and change it. But I prefer a concrete number rather than some type of indice that a lot of times, they're a year delayed before you know what they are actually, the index is. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Any questions? Mr. Moline? Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns in the effects on all these bills. And we're going to be back down here in 10 months for 40 days. So we can do a lot of correcting, tweaking, and I think all of us anticipate doing that for, like what you mentioned, real tax cut versus capping at 5% or whatever. So thanks for your comments, sir. Anyone else? Public comment? Anybody else? Okay, public comment is closed.
Mr. Chairman, we do have
Anybody
two
online?
online comments.
Pardon, Clayton?
We do have two people waiting to comment online.
Okay, let them in, please.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Parvasini, Sublette County Treasurer, also President of the County Treasurers Association, speaking in favor of this bill. We talk about the 5% as a great way for us to budget on not only as the taxpayer, because we are all taxpayers, but when we're talking about budgeting for counties and schools, because those property tax dollars go primarily to the schools. The counties only actually keep about 16% of what we collect. So having a reasonable number for us to use as well. And remember, it's up to 5%. So, some counties did not inflate nearly as much as others. And so if there was only an inflation rate in that county of 2% for property values, then that would be reflected in those counties as well. And it just gives us county treasurers and clerks a way to sort of estimate where we're going to be in the next year if we use a solid number versus maybe a CPI or something like that. And that's really all I had, Mr. Chairman, and I stand for any questions.
Any questions for the assessor? Seeing none, thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Clayton, would you let the next one in, please?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Mr. French?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. I'm Pat Meyer. I'm the Park County Assessor. Just speaking, want to inform you guys on some things you might not have been thinking yet. First and foremost, I'm for this bill. I thought it was a good short-term solution for this year. As you know, I was looking for a constitutional amendment so we could actually do a regular limited thing, but that didn't happen. So we want to go with this bill. I think everything is fine for now. A couple things, again, I'll talk about is I don't understand why duplexes and fourplexes and threeplexes are all residential properties are not included in this. I agree, most of them are rental units. I know, but single family residents, mobile homes, condominiums, townhouses are all being used for rent and they all would receive this limitation. So I would ask that you'd include them for that reason, just to be fair about the whole thing. And plus the rents are also going up high. So in order to stop the rental fees or the rents from going up, we have to limit the increases. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, but it certainly would help. I mean, landlords, when you talk to them, their first thing is you want the best tenant you can have, and you don't want to get rid of that tenant. But eventually, if taxes keep increasing in double digits, you're going to they get passed on to the renters. And that's a problem. We've lost a lot of people, Chairman French, as you know, in Park County that just can't stay here anymore due to the rent increases. Let's talk about the 5%. The 5%, I've studied limitations in 25 states use tax limitations. Not quite like Wyoming's doing it now, but it's still the result of the same thing. If you go back for 30 years and statewide, we averaged 4 to 7% increases statewide in 30 years. And that's with new construction and so forth. So really, even in the last 10 years, we were under 5% all the way up until 2021, when we started going into double digits with some of us. Not all of us then, but by 22, everybody was going up in the double digits and so forth. Along with double digits, you have to remember what the average house is going for. In Park County, as you may know, I mean, we're well over $400,000, but our median wage household wage is $65,000. So there lies some of the problems. Now, if this goes through, at least we'll be stopping the increases that we really have lived with on 5% increases for years. We've been averaging them then all the way up till 2020. We barely had a year that it was statewide that never averaged over 5%, and most of the counties weren't. So we're used to living off that. So I think the 5% is good. I've studied a lot of states, and I know Oklahoma and Arizona use that same 5% increases. But they also do it for vacant land. Vacant land on a regular limitation goes on. You will be limiting improved land, but vacant land you won't. But that's something to maybe think about in 2025. I don't want to, whatever, I want to get this through to stop the limitations for this year, at least on the House. Although preliminary studies say we're not going to go up as much as we have been in Park County. But the damage is already done. The next thing I'd want to talk about in 2025 is considering a rollback to 2020, right before it all started, and increasing it from there. Now, this would be, it's complicated, but I believe it could be done. It's something to consider in the future, not for the 2024. We need to just go with what we got this year. And hopefully you'll pass some homeowners exemption so some of our Park County can get some kind of tax relief to go with this bill and stop the increases, because the increases really has caused the problem. And I know we can find money to spend it on, but all in all, we can live off 5% increases per year. We have a history of doing it. So with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Assessor Myers, I couldn't write fast enough. You were asking why duplexes, and you listed some other things weren't included. Would you list those again so I can?
Sure. Duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes will not be qualified because they're not single-family residents, as I've heard. But when we have all these other single families that are used for rental units and we're keeping them down, I wouldn't understand why we wouldn't be including duplexes and fourplexes in that. Now, when you get to apartment buildings, they're valued a totally different way. They're valued as commercial. Anything over fourplex is valued as commercial property. And we basically have to do them by the cost approach for uniformity, because we don't get that many sales of apartment buildings. So they don't go up as much as the residential fourplexes and duplexes. So I think you should consider that for 2025 anyways in there. If not 2024, I don't think that would be that difficult to do in 2024 to stop those increases as well.
Thank you. Any questions of Assessor Meyer? Seeing none, thank you, Pat.
You're welcome.
Any other people on online?
Mr. Chairman, there's one more, but they don't have their hand raised. Now they do.
Okay, let them in, please.
Hello,
Hello.
good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Mr. Chairman and gentlemen in the Revenue Committee of the Senate, my name is Cheryl Aguirre. I am a citizen. I live in Hot Springs County or Thermopolis. I'm also a member of BCR Initiatives. We at BCR Initiatives, we watched, sorry, my camera isn't working for some reason, but anyways, we've been watching hopefully in this legislature and actually the last, for this legislature to create, pass, discuss, do something for intelligent tax reform, not relief. Instead, every possible bill that came forth, well, there were two. One was possibly reform, HB 203, and another was true reform, HB 0211. You'll never see. One died at introduction, that was 211, and 203 died in the third reading of the House. Wyoming homeowners are in a financial crisis, and they should not have to beg you to keep their own money. We have a $29 billion reserve. You had an unexpected windfall of $500 million 2 tax years ago, then an $800 million windfall a year ago. Shortly, you will be deliberating over a $10 or $11 billion budget. What I find stunning in this body of legislatures, oh, by the way, I'm against this bill, is that you cannot find $300 million to provide immediate tax relief to every homeowner in this state. If you cut 10% from that $10 billion budget, that is $1 billion. This is the people's money and savings and their livelihoods. That $1 billion is better spent in Wyoming than it is in BlackRock, Chase, Sovereign, and the other New World banks in other countries where you have our reserves. Leave the homeowners with their money and give small businesses breaks too. They provide a large portion of the GDP of this state and represent sustainable industry. In closing, the fraud behind HB 045 being decided out of chamber and out of public view was revealed January 31st, 12 days before the hammer dropped when this legislature convened, by a lone podcaster in Sheridan, Wyoming, who reported that our government was working against us. Department of Revenue tax assessors were being trained on House Bill 045, or the bill you're looking at today, with a 27-slide PowerPoint presentation. This was proven true. Seriously, prove him wrong and prove me wrong. Do your job and do something for the people instead of big government. Thank you, and I sit for questions.
Thank you for your comments. We're trying our best. Any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Folks, we're gonna have shift gears here. We'll close public comment on House Bill 45. We're gonna go to House Bill 4 because we've got 8 minutes before we gotta be back up. Yeah, we just want to hear any testimony from anybody that's traveled.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Acting Chairman, I think what's the issue is we're going to continue this meeting after we adjourned, but we wanted folks who came to testify on House Bill 4 who cannot come back after, just for their testimony. So we just don't have time to work this bill now. So I think we need to take testimony for those who can't come back on House Bill 4.
Right, that's what I was trying to get to. Anybody that's traveled or any kind of distance that wants to testify on House Bill 4? Seeing none. Okay. Come on up, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair French. members of the Revenue Committee. As you'll recall, we worked a few different ideas during the interim together, and this was one of the ideas that came out. I believe Senator Pappas and Representative Bear and I were one of the subgroups that just looked at whether we could expand or improve on the property tax refund program that came out of HB 99 last year. So that program's been exceedingly successful. We've served over 9,000 property tax owners have applied, and most of them received a refund. It's a significant refund in some cases, especially for people from Mike, from the northwest part of the state, where property values have doubled in the last 3 years. And all this bill does is modestly expand that program in terms of the income requirement. Right now, we set the limit on income at 125% of county median. And what happens is if you qualified, then you qualified and got the whole amount that was available. But if you earned $1 more, if your household earned $1 more, then you didn't get anything. So the idea behind this bill is just to create 2 tiers. We've actually simplified it since we worked the bill this summer, so that there's just 2 tiers. So we go from 100% of the refund to 65% of the refund and to 25% of the refund as we go up in income. So at a 125% of your median income, you get 100% of the refund. At 145% of the median income, you get 65% of the refund. And at 165% of the median income, you get 25% of the refund. And after that, it's 0. So it's a way to just kind of help some people who were right on the edge of qualifying at least get something back, given that they are limited in their income on a fixed income, seniors and whatnot, who really have qualified. The governor put $20 million into the budget for this program. It is one of the areas that I believe the House and Senate are in agreement that $20 million should stay in. This bill, and Director Hinson could speak to that, she's got some figures. This bill would require a modest appropriation to expand the program, and of, I think, 1.8 million. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, any other public comment? We just got like 3-4 minutes. I apologize. Then we'll have to come back after we adjourn. All right, folks, we'll come back after. Who did?
You want to speak?
Chairman, I do want to speak. However, I think it'd take more than 4 minutes. So I'm willing to come back.
You're able to come back after we adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, with that, we'll be back here after we adjourn. to discuss 145 and 4.
45.
Pardon? Yeah, 45, not 145, 45 and 4. Thanks, everybody.